Okay, so I'm now recording. It is March 28th. This is the steering committee meeting. It looks like we don't quite have quorum, and we'll probably have an abbreviated meeting because of that. Some other folks have to leave. First off, I want to introduce Alexandria here. Alexandria Storm, who's a college student who's shadowing me today. And so hopefully nobody objects to her sitting in. I don't think we're going to be discussing anything super controversial.
We're recording it and publishing it on YouTube.
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
Okay, yeah.
I can't imagine unless Alexandria has a problem with this that we're gonna have any issues.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all good then.
And so, yeah, so Quinton and I, our homework along with Tim, who's not here, was to start talking about how do we track membership? How does that actually add up to voting? And we've had some good discussions and would love to do a little bit of a checkpoint in terms of, you know, what we think is acceptable or not, because it turns out that this stuff is, like everything else, more complicated than we thought it was. So I'll put that on the agenda if other folks want to put stuff on the agenda.
By the way, I pre-populated the agenda with follow-up items from everything we did, and I volunteered as note taker since I keep shoving that on somebody else all the time. So maybe, Joe, if you want to be bosun and run us through the topics we have there.
Sure. Oh wait, I'm on the wrong window. So
unless somebody else wants to be bosun, whatever. I have no idea how this works anymore.
I know, we had this theory of how we were going to do this stuff, but at least, you know.
You started talking first, so I think you just stepped forward.
I feel like, you know, when I hit the record button, it's up to me to actually say something along with that. So, okay, so the first topic, so I think most of this is just follow up on previous meetings. I think there's charter approvals. We had the spreadsheet there. Let's see, do you have the spreadsheet someplace? I don't think we do. I know Brandon created that. I think what we should do is come up with the expected number of SIGs that everybody should sign up for, have people sign up for them. I think one question is that should you sign up for a SIG that you have familiarity with, or should it be something that you don't have familiarity with? I err on the side of familiarity because I think that'll just help make things go smoother. And we can have a steering committee member help see the SIG through the chartering process, and then probably do, you know, approval via email. Does that seem reasonable?
Just to be clear on that last point, that's like the person who's familiar with the SIG, should they be primary or secondary, or?
I would say primary.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need familiarity, but we don't really want the SIG leads reviewing their own charters. So
yeah,
between the two extremes.
And I think, you know, if as we review charters, I think it's worthwhile calling out the scope, which is going to be the big thing, sort of like how does that SIG define themselves, and then any deviations from our template, we should take a look at it and make sure that they look sane.
I think so far nobody is using the template.
I think Contribx is, I think.
Oh, okay.
Do we have anything like a deadline in mind, or at some point do we start going down the list and identifying who has done a charter and who hasn't? Or
well, so one thing I've been doing is going to some SIGs to actually explain what's going on, because I still think there's a lot of confusion and not a complete understanding of what we're asking. So I went to Cluster Lifecycle this week and talked to them. Like they also have the issue that they don't understand subprojects. They have a couple of working groups that actually should be subprojects. So helping them understand what's that difference and where we're going, what the intention is there, as well as the charter, which they hadn't looked at the template or the governance guidelines at all, and help them understand what we're looking for in the charter. I think we need to do more of that outreach, judging by, like, all of this seemed to be totally news to them. And they have a lot of sub-projects. So, you know, figuring out, does it make sense for them to have a TL and things like that is something that's going to require some discussion on their side to figure out, I think.
Can I suggest that maybe using the spreadsheet, maybe we each take the small number of SIGs that we've signed up for and go and do exactly that for them, do a Q&A and you know, answer whatever questions they may have, and make sure they're kind of on track towards producing a sane one of these things.
I think that would be great. The other thing I was going to mention is a number of SIGs have created repos in Kubernetes SIGs, or rather, I think they were all created by some steering committee member. Not all of those SIGs, I don't believe, met the requirements for being allowed to do that, right? So we said that those projects were going to have to identify their subprojects, for example. The SIGs would have to identify their subprojects, or at least vet the list that's in sigs.yaml already. And some of the SIGs did not do that, and they got repos. So we need to hold the line. And if you can communicate this to Tim St. Clair to name names, Joe, that would be.
I will take it personally to go work with Tim to whip cluster lifecycle into shape there.
Well, there's cluster lifecycle and scheduling, like both.
Oh, did he do it in scheduling too? He hasn't been super involved in scheduling lately, but I'm not gonna.
Well, actually, we just got a mail that he was stepping down, right? Like I just got a mail about the transition.
Yeah, but they already have a repo.
Sure.
When talking to the SIGs about, hey, you asked for a repo, I also use that as an opportunity to say, hey, have you started on a charter yet?
So I think one idea here that may make sense, and this will also help us keep the number of SIGs under control, is to have a primary sort of, steering committee ambassador per SIG, right? So that you get to know those folks, you end up being a point of contact, you end up, explaining some of these things.
Sounds like a good idea. I don't think realistically we can attend all of their SIG meetings, but maybe like monthly or quarterly or whatever, yeah.
Aaron had his hand up.
You're
Thank
muted.
you. Wow, this keyboard is loud. So I was just suggesting that we don't have the process documented right now for how what people need to go through to add their repos. So that was something that's further down on the agenda, and I think what Brian suggested should be written down so we all know that's the process that needs to be followed. Reminding people, hey, charter, hey, sub-projects, who's got the authority to create the repos and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Eric Fada volunteered to automate some of the process. So I suggested that we have a whitelist. Automation is great, but we need to have a whitelist until all the SIGs have met the requirements.
One of the other things that I had signed up for and I fell down on the job was to get some OARP type of documentation on the SIG charter stuff also. I'll get that done. I'll probably do it this weekend. So.
And one other thing I'll put out there, for the idea of having somebody go around to each and every SIG, contributor experience is already trying to do that on like a quarterly basis, just to talk about what's going on from a contributor experience perspective. And I think the more information that we can feed to them in terms of what the steering committee is suggesting in terms of project governance, the less legwork we would have to do.
So we should go talk to them first, in other words.
So that's why I've been trying to be an active participant in contributor experience, since that's a lot of where the mechanics and logistics of this stuff rolls out anyway. But I think that could save us time, though I do think at least for this charter thing, we should sign up to do individual outreach.
And here I was going to volunteer to do contributor experience.
All right. So can somebody take an action item to take this spreadsheet and send mail to the steering committee saying, hey, everybody needs to sign up for at least X of these things, number of steering committees divided by number of SIGs.
Vice versa.
Yes, vice versa. And let's just try and at least get names down, and then we can set a schedule after that and of what needs to get done. And I think playing double duty in terms of like the sub project structure, the chartering, and being a point of contact, a friendly face for answering some of these questions. I think because Brian's been doing a lot of that, and it's too much for one person to try and go to all these meetings and talk to all these people.
I can be shepherd, whip, whatever for the spreadsheet. I'll send out periodically to make sure.
One piece of trivia, I put my name down next to the whole thing as comments because I didn't have edit permission on the doc, so it seems like nobody approved those or whatever. So just so you know, I did actually put my name down, but it's in comments. Maybe you can do whatever you need to do there.
So this is shared. Let me look at this. So this is shared with steering private. Is the email address that you have on steering private not a Google address?
I think it's my Huawei address, and Huawei is not a Google domain, whatever. So I can switch that around and make it my private address.
Although actually, Quinton, what I've found is it doesn't matter. Like I used my Microsoft address, and you can create a Google account with your with a non-Google address, and it'll just work.
Oh, I didn't know that was possible. Okay, I'll do that.
You just create you basically just create a Google account, and it just works even
Well,
without
if you
it
want to have, I mean, the other thing we can do is we can take your personal address, add that to the group as a non-email member or something like that. So, you know.
Well, I'll figure out the details. Don't worry.
Okay. So let's fix that so that you get the permissions and it flows through.
Yeah, but I mean, like I have it's shared with Beaverance at Microsoft, which is clearly not a Google domain, but it still works.
Why not?
I keep campaigning for it, but you know. They said something about using what was it, Lotus Notes. They're going to switch to Lotus Notes. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, and Michelle posted the link there for what you need to do to sign up with email. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, let me find the notes again. So I feel like we have a little bit of a plan there. All right, the project membership contributor ladder replacement proposal. Let me start out here, Quinton, and you can interrupt me if you think I'm misstating stuff.
Sure.
So we started off pretty far-ranging, and I think we scoped this down a little bit to answer a concrete question, because this is the thing that I think really matters the most, and we need to get our act together, is who and how will we determine how we do voting in the next steering committee election, right? Because we don't want to be in a position where we're making stuff up as we go along. There's these dual tensions that we're feeling between delegating sort of the voter roles to SIGs so that they can define, but then also having some control so that SIGs don't game the system. And it's that tension that I think has caused the most discussion between us. There's really two proposals that, and Quinton came up with one and I came up with the other, but there's a lot of overlap between these things. The one proposal, and again, I'm paraphrasing some stuff that Quinton wrote down, so I may not have all the details, is to really say that it's more like a representative democracy where people inside of a SIG vote for members, and then those members determine who inside of the SIG gets to represent that SIG, and those folks get to vote in the steering committee. There's an open question of, do all SIGs then get an equal number of members to vote, or do we determine that some SIGs are more important, more impactful, more valuable than others, and we give an uneven number? I think some of the worries is that there may be SIGs which are too skewed towards one vendor, both in terms of the value that they add and the membership, and there's other SIGs that are, pretty ineffectual in terms of not adding a lot of value, not being very active. And then there's this issue of SIG packing, where a SIG might sort of, say, hey, we're going to make everybody a member, and then they end up dominating the election. So if we have some sort of limit at the SIG level, that's one way to approach this. Quinton, is that a good summary, or am I missing any of the details there?
Yeah, that's about right. And the question is, how do you, it seems like we do need to make sure that not all SIGs are equal, but we don't want to impose that top down because it's kind of controversial. So maybe allowing it to bubble bottom up is sort of where we're heading to, I guess.
Yeah. Is there a document about this?
Yeah, we have some notes that we can share. Can you share those, Quinton? It's very rough notes, so like we're still just oriented.
I don't think they're necessarily kind of sanitized for public review yet, so I don't know. I can stick.
Yeah, I don't think we want to share them.
So how do we reconcile? Have you thought about how to reconcile the democratic aspects with the demonstrated contribution model? Right, like approvers and reviewers are maybe somewhat democratic based on like the people who already hold that role and bring in.
So the alternate proposal, and this is the one that I was proposing, is that we let SIGs maintain a list of, we got to find the right term here, call them roles, call them membership types or something like that.
I'm a fan of that.
And then those SIGs have their own criteria for those things. We still have the issue that we may have a particular SIG that becomes too vendor heavy or is ineffective and has a lot of members out of proportion to the value that SIG is bringing to the community. One of the ways that we could approach that is like some number of months before the before the election, we could take a snapshot of all the members. And then we could review in context the number of people in any particular role, the amount of impact from that SIG in that thing. And then we could actually determine whether that particular group is qualifying or non-qualifying. And then only and we'd err on the side of qualifying, and only the qualifying groups would get to vote. So that way, if we ended up with, I'll take an example here. It's like, and obviously with Helm, looking to move to the CNCF, it changes things. But there's a whole bunch of people who are chart maintainers, right? Should being a chart maintainer actually qualify you to voting for steering committee? I think that's a discussion that we could have. I don't know what the right answer there is, but it's one of those things where it's a lot of people, their contribution to the larger community is relatively limited. And then we can look at that on a role by role basis or group by group.
Well, the existing members of standing, the bar was really low.
It was.
I think a chart maintainer is probably above that bar.
Well, but I think one of the things that I'm worried about is not the list of people today, but will a SIG go through and actually create a situation where they end up packing and actually making people members looking forward to the election? And I think the advantage that we had last time is that we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this, so there wasn't any time for anybody to game the system.
Right. And just to be clear, I don't think it's only malicious intent. I mean, if you don't give a SIG clear guidance on how many votes they should dish out, they'll each use their own discretion to decide how many to dish out, and they may not do it consistently across all the SIGs.
So the other thing is the question of like, look, if you are qualifying through multiple SIGs, should you get multiple votes or should you get one vote? I think if we view it as sort of SIG representation, and if a SIG picks you to represent them, then multiple SIGs pick you to represent them, then that implies multiple votes. Whereas if it's this sort of like who gets to determine, qualifying versus non-qualifying membership, then it feels like it's one person, one vote, no matter the vectors that you get included from.
Yeah, I don't think we ever intended it to be SIG representation. I think we always intended it to be skin in the game. I remember the original discussions, and it was basically like, prove that you have skin in the game, which to me says the SIG membership was just a way of demonstrating that.
But to be fair, Brendan, all that stuff was done before we had the elections. And so I think the story changes dramatically now that we have folks on the steering committee that were elected. And I think, we should be informed by that experience, but I don't think we should necessarily be restricted by it.
Fair enough. I will say, I don't think that it should be about SIG representation. I think that it should be about, effectively like...
For steering committee votes specifically.
For steering committee votes, correct, yes.
Yeah, I don't
think we want proportional representation.
I don't think that part is too contentious, but I guess there is an element, and I'm fairly happy with one person, one vote. But if you had an individual who maybe made reasonably substantial contributions across multiple SIG, or maybe an individual who makes very large contributions in multiple SIGs, should they have more say in the election than someone who makes a large contribution in only one SIG? And yeah, I guess the reasonable answer is no, they shouldn't. And
I think the answer has to be no, they shouldn't, or else we're down a very slippery slope of evaluating people's effectively their worth in the community. Which
the SIGs do that. So the SIGs say, do we want one of our votes to go to this person?
Yeah, I don't really want people to think that they are. I guess I think that the steering committee is beholden to the community, not to the SIGs, and so therefore the SIGs at some level shouldn't care who is elected to the steering committee, or they shouldn't care because they're SIGs. They should care because they're members of the community. But
I strongly agree with Brendan. I also kind of have concerns that, like, when you were referencing the charts maintainers example, I understand it was just like it could be interpreted as assigning importance or weights to certain sub-projects within the Kubernetes community, which I think is probably also something we don't want to do.
Okay, so
I think to Joe's point, actually, though, I think actually there's different motivations for being a charts maintainer than like you could be doing it for your startup, so your startup's easy to install, right, at some level.
And I understand that's maybe a special case. I'm just generalizing it to it's currently a sub-project of Kubernetes. And so it's something that I would want to apply to all sub-projects of Kubernetes. And so some sub-projects are more important than others, I feel like that's kind of the SIG representation problem, only now it's...
Well, I think actually
I guess what
Joe was emphasizing that Helm is likely to be leaving anyway, so it's not a sub-project anyway.
Well, I'll give you another example of, let's say that we have these cloud-specific SIGs, right? And I'm not going to name names. So like, we have, SIG ABC Cloud, okay? And we find that the leads there, it tends to be dominated by one company, and it gets to the point where they add 300 members, okay? And the value that they're adding just disproportionately benefits that particular company, and all the employees are for that employed by that company. That will skew our steering committee elections pretty dramatically. Now, we do have protections in the steering committee charter so that we don't get over-representation. But
how much of this do we think we need to work out in advance, as opposed to if we see obvious abuse, then we can
well,
say,
that's what I'm trying to say is that what we can do is we can say that, hey, we're going to freeze the roles like 2 months beforehand, and then there's a chance for us to say, okay, this particular group is non-qualifying, and that's our opportunity to have some editorializing on it.
Well, I mean, maybe the right answer is to actually apply the same. I mean, I'm with Ryan. I don't think this is going to be a problem actually, but like maybe we can apply the same representation guidelines to voting membership that we do to the steering committee, and say like, look, no more than 30% of the voting population can be from any one company. Period. End of story.
That's an interesting idea.
Right.
So then, what do you do so
I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah, I mean, it is explicitly saying like, hey, if you're a giant company and you commit a ton of resources, like we're going to limit your representation. You're just going to have to deal with that.
And then how do we decide, if a company is oversubscribed, how do we decide?
It's up to them, just like it is a steering committee.
An interesting question, I guess, is do we need to cap the votes, or is capping the representation on the steering committee enough?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question too, Brian.
Yeah, I think actually that's probably enough. Like, I mean, I think this is in some ways comes back down to the same decision we said before, which was like, you can either restrict who is eligible to vote, or you can restrict who's eligible to be a candidate, but you probably don't have to restrict both.
Right.
And it might be the same thing here.
So the one thing that I do want us to be aware of is that if you say, oh, we can always adjust this and actually step in if we need to, I think it smells really, really, really bad.
I see that.
We
Yeah.
have to.
Step in and editorialize on the eve of an election.
Well, it would just be a higher bar, right? It would be like, look, half the people who are voting are from company X. That doesn't seem right. And they all came in through this one SIG. Like,
But
I mean, that's.
I think never underestimate, Brendan, the ability for some people to play lawyer around this stuff versus being reasonable. And I think everybody in this group is, hey, let's be reasonable about stuff. Not everybody in the community approaches it the same way.
Well, I mean, I'd be okay with setting up limits on either company representation in the voting blocks or SIG representation in the voting blocks, and just saying like, hey, 100 divided by number of SIGs equals the percentage that you get to fill in the voting blocks, or maybe double it to make sure that bigger SIGs get better, can have better representation or whatever. Like,
but that's back to proportional SIG representation.
But I mean,
it's not proportional SIG representation. It doesn't imply that every SIG needs that representation. It's actually more like capping maximal SIG representation, which is
I just want to do
opposite.
A time check.
We're
the document is in now. I think nobody has permissions to access it. But once that's fixed, we can take a look at it after the meeting.
Like I said, these are super raw notes, and so I don't think we're ready to share these things publicly. I just wanted to share some of the questions that we've been struggling with here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like having skin in the game, as denoted by presence in owners' files, kind of demonstrates that people are actually contributing value to the community, in theory. And so if some company decides to flood owners' files with a bunch of people, in theory, if we're doing this right, they should be flooding the community with value because they're actually contributing to Kubernetes. And so there, I think they should have some sort of say in where the project is headed.
That's the intent anyway.
But I think so first of all, just clearly there's, if somebody's adding value, that's great. Not all value benefits the community as much as other value, right? Again, the cloud specific stuff tends to benefit a single company. versus working on, say, a release team, right? Which is obviously a thankless task. And I think, we have folks that are working full time on this stuff, putting their blood and sweat into it. And then we have somebody who's like, did one chart, as an example, right? And they were made a maintainer just because people got tired of approving the version updates.
Well, it's never going to be even. Right?
Again, I totally agree, but we need to, I think we need to make sure that we don't, that at some point we draw a line and that line feels fair.
Fair. I mean, if you look at the representation that's on the steering committee and then the representation, if you go look at DevStats, the size of the companies who are contributing here, it kind of sort of lines up. I don't know how much you're going to be able to avoid that.
Well, I think DevStats actually, helps forward the illusion that all value is through code.
Well, I think we maybe should be talking to Contribex about how we can measure other valuable things like PR reviews.
Yeah.
Correct. So on that note, thank you for that update, Joe. I think.
All right. So me and Quinton and Tim will keep noodling on this stuff. All right. What do we have next?
KubeCon face-to-face.
Well, I don't think we should do it since Sarah's not going to be there.
I think you all can do it. I won't be there, but I will make an effort to either call in if we have something or trust that you all are awesome and you're keeping the projects in mind.
We should do a group Pilates course instead.
Yeah. There you go. However, I can only direct it from here.
Yeah, after thinking about it since the last time we talked, I agree more with Brian's devil's advocate point, which was we already have a lot of meetings during KubeCon and we're doing a lot of face-to-face things and could use that time to talk to people who are using Kubernetes or other things. So I'm okay with us not doing it if that's the way we're going. We're hearing.
Counterpoint, when we met face-to-face at the last KubeCon, I heard us say that we got more done in that hour than we had in the previous months.
True.
So what can we do to make this meeting as productive as the face-to-face meetings?
Touche. Make decisions. I mean, so look, I'm happy to hallway track with whoever's there, and sounds like we'll just do that.
Yeah, come find me.
Okay.
Happy to hang out.
Yeah, I think it might be worthwhile as we sort of do our little subcommittee type of things to actually do some working group meetings then versus trying to get everybody together, if it makes sense. Like Quinton and me and Quinton and Tim might make sense for us to get together and try and make something happen.
Sure, I think, if there are subtopics to discuss among subsets of people,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, that's up to those people, I think.
In the
Okay.
future, I'd really love let's all get together and maybe do some trust balls.
You cut out there, Michelle. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
Oh, we should totally get together at some point and do some trust falls.
I was going to say, Michelle and I had dinner a few weeks ago, and I mean, it was enormously valuable just to get to know Michelle a bit better. Not, I'm sure a lot of you know each other well. I would be supportive of a, totally optional social thing. If somebody wants to set it up and say, put your name here if you want to join for dinner. If you're not there, that's fine. If you rather want to do something else, that's fine. No harm done.
I'd love to sign up for a dinner if somebody organizes.
There's a great molecular gastronomy place in Copenhagen that I was planning to go to, but Tim may know of it and may be inclined to.
I went to a really great, when I was there for DockerCon, I went to a really great non-molecular gastronomy restaurant, but it has a Michelin star, so it was, I highly recommend it. So if you need it, let me know.
I think Red Hat spent all their money on CoreOS, so they won't be able to go to Michelin restaurants anymore.
It wasn't that bad. I think it was like, what, €250 a person? Something like that.
Brandon can treat everyone.
Okay, next up, item values. I'm fine with merging it. I think there's only one open comment on it, which is Ken's about how do we bring the end user perspective in. We can start a longer conversation about how to do that. Thoughts? Thumbs up.
I mainly put that on the agenda to remind everybody that you've had that PR hanging out there. None of us have said +1 or anything on it.
Right. So go +1 them.
I have to say I didn't see the PR and all the noise from.
What? It's noisy? Come on.
Here's your
I
high
think
bid.
the other question is, do we need it in the first iteration of the values, or can we add it? Because I don't want to like continue to indefinitely block the whole thing.
Right, but values generally you don't want to change, ideally. So if we...
I don't know.
Perfect is the enemy of good.
Absolutely. Wave to Brian, he's leaving.
Bye, Brian.
Bye.
See you, Brian. Well, I think let's go +1 it, unless there are any wild objections. We can merge it.
Go
And I gotta be
+1.
honest, I mean, there's a certain amount of like, if we put the users in there, there's the discussion of like who the users are, what is in scope, what is out of scope, and to some degree that's defined by the contributors. And so if there's a user that, segment that is not well represented as a contributor, then I'm not sure like how much we owe them.
Yeah, that sounds like scope creep to me too, ish. Honestly, I've seen Sarah give multiple talks that talk about the values of Kubernetes now, and they're still quote unquote undocumented. So maybe we should have the document.
Maybe this means I'm jumping the gun by giving these talks, but actually I'm just socializing it. That's what I'm doing. All right, go +1 my PR and I'll merge it.
Already done. All right.
Already done. All right. Deprecating incubator spelling out repository process. There is an issue open.
Okay, this was me. I just said like we all like collectively say and know that the incubator is dead and deprecated, but there's no documentation that actually says that. So I think it's time that we do that. Phil, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a PR actually out right now. I can link in the chat.
Sweet.
It doesn't like go into detail. It does just put at the top like that the process is deprecated and
The incubator is dead. Long live the incubator.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's okay. I had something similar. I just haven't PR'd it yet, but yeah.
Awesome.
Go ahead. So there's
I win.
that. Hooray, you win. Merge race. And then I figured that the next step would be to actually document what the process is to add repositories. If I can't do incubator, what can I do instead? And we'll do the things that Brian said, where it's like, well, make sure you're on the up and up with a charter and all of your sub-projects are represented in SIG's YAML, and then reach out to the steering committee mailing list, and somebody from the steering committee will say, yes, this looks good, and we'll go from there. Does that sound like a good straw man? Cool.
I'm really looking forward to getting the contributor website set up so that this stuff becomes more discoverable for folks. That's the other thing I'm going to do this weekend.
Okay, and then next agenda item with my name on it is just kind of asking about sub-projects. I think we kind of answered some of this. I was trying to get a feel for how we feel we've done on socializing what sub-projects are and why people should care. What I've heard is we still need to go talk to SIGs individually, but there's it's documented somewhere at least. And then I think next steps would be, I started to see topics used in some of the Kubernetes SIGs repos, so I think I just want to create a bot that looks at SIGs YAML and applies topics to all of the repos that are called out in there. And then maybe start to nag repos that don't have an owner's file in them, since that's our primary way of specifying who owns what subprojects. And then I could try doing the bidirectional mapping of saying there's a SIG field or something in owner's files that ties back to SIG's YAML. I don't know, like how are we feeling about the progress of subprojects?
I feel like we need to make them feel like more of a thing, right? SIGs feel like a thing. They get a mailing list, they have meetings. I think we need a little bit more sort of structure around declaring something a sub-project versus not. I think we also, like the tooling around figuring out where do we have code that's not allocated to a project or sub-project or SIG. I think getting that tooling in place is going to be critical also. Because then we can try to delete it and see if anybody cares.
Could you say that last part again? Sorry, I missed what you said.
No, I was going to say, like, if we find orphaned code that nobody claims ownership for, then we can threaten to delete it and see who squeals. I feel like this is a place where we do need the next level of tooling, and that just needs to be built.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out what the next level of tooling should be. Like,
and I think doing something along the lines of, and you know, maybe it's something simple, but like, you know, right now sigs.yaml causes a bunch of directories to be created that have readmes. So that looks like, oh, this is a thing that has a real entry. If we create subdirectories from sigs for each sub-project and just put the name in there, so there's a directory with a readme and it looks like who's responsible, it's and sort of promote it from being a bulleted list on the readme for the SIG, that'll make it feel like it's a much more concrete thing that you know, that people can build around. Is that silly? I don't know. That doesn't, it seems silly, but it also seems like it might be effective.
I can get with that. I like that.
So that'd be a relatively small change to the sigs.yaml generator.
It's pretty easy to automate. I guess I'm trying to wonder, like, what if we decide that's a bad idea? How do we roll back from that? But I don't know. Like, you know, right? May as well try it. I just don't know. Like,
we need to find the behavior that we want to encourage, and we need to make that behavior feel fancy and special and recognized.
And that's what I'm kind of maybe trying to drive towards, is like who is doing the behavior that we want to incentivize. I was going to say, like, Helm is one of our most active sub-projects, but maybe we should look elsewhere. And so I'm trying to figure out what other active sub-projects are doing behavior that is appropriate, and how can we incentivize them to do more of that behavior?
Well, I don't think they necessarily view it. I mean, a lot of the things that are active, you know, sub-projects are not really viewed as totally separate things, right? And I think that's part of what we need to define this, so that things like the rescheduler, you know, is a sub-project, but really it's sort of seen as part and parcel, right? And so I think there is a question of how much formalism, how much otherism do we want around sub-projects versus, hey, it's an organizational structure. Cluster API is another great example. Brian, that's one of the things Brian's like, as a working group, it should be a sub-project at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go make an issue to try making subdirectories for all the sub-projects, and we'll see how that works.
And then I think also, as we do the charter, just evangelizing, like, hey, this is a way for you to create smaller decision-making groups within a SIG.
Yeah, for sure. Any other comments from the rest of the group? Otherwise, I think that's all I put on the agenda. I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to discuss.
I don't have anything top of mind. If folks, after hearing the issues that we're wrestling with, want to join Quinton and Tim and me in terms of figuring out this whole SIG representation thing, it's not too late to sort of raise your hand, but I will understand if you want to let us wrestle with this stuff.
Yeah, I think it would benefit from some additional eyes, actually. I think it'd be good if anybody has the bandwidth to pitch in.
Because this is one of those things where there's clearly no right answer.
I am happy to participate if somebody can invite me and it doesn't conflict. So.
That's a high bar, the conflict one, not the invite.
Oh, I know, but yeah, I don't want you all to move to accommodate me, but if it doesn't conflict, I'll try and participate.
It's been pretty ad hoc so far.
Comment on the doc.
Thank you, Sarah.
I can get involved too.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. That'd be wonderful. Just because this will be a very controversial thing, and like there's no good answer. So.
Just I've been working on the code of conduct committee thing, but then I decided to go to Hawaii last week, so that didn't happen. So anyway, just wanted to let y'all know that.
I approve of your prioritization, Michelle.
Thank you. I took a week off before the Hawaii week too, so definitely haven't done any steering committee things since the last meeting. But this week will be, this upcoming week, I'll focus on the Code of Conduct Committee. And last week we discussed the pros and cons of having a Kubernetes specific Code of Conduct Committee versus a CNCF wide Code of Conduct Committee. So I'll just go ahead and drop a list of pros and cons from that discussion and put that in a format that people can take a look at.
Awesome.
Oh, quick question, Michelle. So I mentioned that Helm is looking at joining the CNCF as an incubator project. I know you were keeping that kind of on the down low. We were going to post this recording. Is there a timeline for when you're going to make that be a little bit? I mean, we're not going to advertise that, but it was included here, and I want to be respectful of that. So let me know when you think the recording should go out, or I'm not sure if we can redact it really.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that big of a deal. Let me go back and ask and get back to y'all. I know it was kind of hush-hush, but I don't know if it needs to be necessarily. So let me just go make sure with the team, and then I'll get on.
I'll wait before I hear from you before I post the recording publicly.
The important thing I thought I heard was that our messages were aligned, and we do agree that this is sort of the correct direction forward. It seems like Helm becoming a CNCF project is a natural fit, and the steering committee is in support of this. I personally wonder how many other projects are interested in taking a similar path, and whether or not there are any precedents that we need to be careful about setting here. So that's kind of my only thing, but like I don't really see a need other than like some kind of more formal announcement than it being talked about on a video recording. Like, we're totally supportive of it.
I've got a feeling that will sort itself out, in the sense that projects will decide whether they want to become part of Kubernetes or part of the CNCF. And if they go to the CNCF and the CNCF POC says this doesn't belong here, why don't you try Kubernetes, or vice versa, it'll kind of figure itself out. I don't think we need to do anything other than evaluate projects that want to become part of Kubernetes.
My understanding is it was the sort of thing where the CNCF is really only for projects that are currently sub-projects of Kubernetes or anywhere within the Kubernetes, the various organizations that we own. The CNCF would be interested in making sure that the steering committee approves of such movement. They do not want it to be perceived as though the CNCF is stealing projects out from under us. And so if there's like any editorial decision we feel like making, they're cool with that.
I think largely we're just trying to keep Kubernetes scoped. So.
Yeah, and there are people on this committee that are also on the CNCF, DOC, and governing board, etc. So I think there's enough bandwidth between those two organizations to do the right thing.
Agree.
All right, I think we've beaten the horse here, to use a unfortunate metaphor. Are any other topics that anybody wants to bring up? Or we get 10 minutes back? Oh, Michelle, you're about to talk.
I do have a thing. I just noticed that the definition of a working group is rather thin in the Kubernetes community repo. Everything else has like a lot of words, and working group doesn't. So maybe we should hash that out sometime.
No, I actually, that's a really good point, because this was occurring to me the other day, is that I think amongst at least, like, we had a good discussion of this before we had the steering committee elections. And I think we came up with a good definition of the difference between SIG, working group, and committee. I don't think we have that written down anywhere really well. And so I think somebody needs to go ahead and document that. I'm happy to take that on as part of my other stuff if somebody wants to add an action item to the notes for me. I'll create a PL for that.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
I don't have any more things. Thanks.
You have more stuff? Okay. No? Oh, no, okay. I thought, you had some great brainstorms in Hawaii. All right. I'll see you all later.
All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody.